Is there something else that we should be looking at that is separate from what is happening in Japan? Other currencies, what is the next carry trade that could unwind?
Yeah, dollar China, right? You know, we're used to seeing a 2 after the 7. Now suddenly it's a 1, right?
Yeah.
And there is, I mean, arbitrage at the very least, because there's a difference now, a noticeable difference between offshore and onshore, yes?
So it's interesting you mentioned that because I was actually going to bring this up. I think the next potential carry trade unwind could be the yuan, and actually we've already seen glimpses of that earlier this week. I mean, dollar CNH collapsed to sub 7.10 at one stage, and I think most people's impression is that the carry trade is undertaken by hedge funds, fast money. But I think to me in Asia, the biggest carry trade players are actually exporters. Because you look at Asia and China, it's not just China. You look at Malaysia, you look at Korea, Taiwan. They've been running large trade surpluses, and yet the currency has continued to weaken. Why is that? Because the exporters have hoarded foreign exchange. They have converted the bare minimum because they were playing the carry trade. They can get much better interest rate returns by parking their money in US dollars. Well, now that the Fed signaled they're going to cut, you're not going to have that, nice, high interest rates anymore, plus volatility in the market. I think you're going to start to see a lot of these exporters deciding maybe it's time to cash in my chips and start to convert. And that's when you can really see some big moves in Asian currencies in particular.
And if I may, BIS suggests cross-border yen borrowing, to your point, Khoon, has increased by $742 billion since the end of 2021. So that would imply that there's still some room to run in terms of this unwind.
Yes, most definitely. But again, I want to emphasize, I think the messy, panicky part of the unwind is probably done. I hope so. From now on, I think the unwind will probably take the form of, selling dollar yen on rallies, for example. And I think it's also going to be interesting to see how, for example, the Nikkei and US tech continues to perform, because I think the story is that part of that yen-funded carry trade has gone into U.S. technology stocks, for example. So if they're tied really together at the hip, then further yen unwinding means that potentially the Nikkei and tech stocks might continue to struggle. We might not see the crash that we saw, but they might struggle for a while.
Fair enough. Quickly back to potentially the next carrier, right? In the Chinese currency unwinding, now 7.1 something-ish. If it's going to move higher, firmer, steadier, what sort of levels are we looking at, do you think?
Look, I think in China's case, I don't think we're going to see a huge, messy unraveling because, number one, the PBOC is still on the easing bias. So we still expect the Chinese central bank to cut rates because in China's case, domestic demand is still extremely weak. They still need to provide a lot of support to the economy. And the Chinese authorities continue to keep a very firm grip on the currency. Again, very different from the yen, which is pretty much freely floating, apart from instances where the BOJ intervened. But in the yuan's case, they kept the currency very firm. So they're going to prevent any unruly unraveling or strengthening in the yuan.